The cost of cybercrime globally is estimated to be $11 trillion a year. That's the size of a very major economy.
The UK is hit by an increasing number of severe cyber attacks, according to the government's cybersecurity watchdog. So what does it mean for the country's security? And what is the government actually doing about it? We'll discuss on this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and according to the government's cyber watchdog, the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is a branch of GCHQ, there are 4 major cyber attacks on the UK every single week. And that is a big increase on this time last year. And the reason they're saying it is they published their annual report today, where they sum up the work they're doing and the cyber threat to the UK. So let's join all the digital dots, because we're joined here in the studio by the BBC's cyber correspondent, Joe Tidy. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
And you've got a tome in front of you.
I have 100 pages of cyber goodness. This is the...
Well, it's not goodness, though, is it?
Well,
the government would argue it is.
They would argue
it's fighting against it, but
you're right, though. It's not good reading in a sense of, wow, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world of cyber that we really need to pay attention to. But yes, this is the big book that they gave us at the cybersecurity event this morning.
Also joining us down the line is Emily Taylor, who is the CEO of Oxford Information Labs. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
What do you do in your labs?
We do cyber intelligence, and we also have a non-profit data sharing hub for the exchange of fraud and scam threat signals.
Oh, well, so basically what's happened today with this National Cybersecurity Centre report, Joe, is just that, sharing information about the scale of the cyber threat to the UK. And the clue, it's big.
Yeah, that's right. So every year they do this. It's the annual review that the National Cybersecurity Centre do. And in a sense, they're kind of like marking their own work, because they get to tell about all the wonderful things they've been doing. But also they use it as an opportunity to remind people of the dangers out there. And what they're saying this year is that there's been a huge increase in the number of what they call nationally significant cyber attacks. So last year, there were about 89 of these. This year, there's been 203 or 4, I think, from memory, which is
more than doubled.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is encapsulated in the total number of cyber attacks that they have handled. So they send out incident responders teams to help companies and organisations recover. They did 400 of those. 200 were nationally significant. And the thing that's really quite striking for me is, of those 200, 18 of them are Category 2 cyber attacks. So these are really, really serious cyber attacks that affect a huge number of people, an industry, or the UK economy, or all 3 of those. So they never...
You know what, that makes me wonder, what's a Category 1?
Well, Category 1 is called a cyber emergency.
Right.
I asked them yesterday, has anything happened that would be a Category 1? And they said, you'll know it when you see it.
Right, because it'll stop working.
We're talking about the absolute most serious... I mean, this is sort of cyber war scenario, Category 1. But Category 2, again, they wouldn't tell me which cyber attacks count as that. But if you think about the Jaguar Land Rover attack this year, which has brought this massive multinational corporation to its knees, production has not been the same since August. They're sort of starting to go back a little bit now, but no cars are being built. They're losing £50 million a week. Huge number of supply chain companies are potentially going bust. I would probably guess that's a Category 2. So the thing that struck me about this report is that there are 17 other Jaguar Land Rover-sized attacks that we just don't even know about.
Yeah. Well, although I was going to say, Emily, we know about the attacks on Co-op and Marks and Spencer's.
We do. Yes, we do. But and there's been many more as well. The Marks and Spencer's one has been really emblematic this year. There was also an attack on a children's nursery a couple of weeks ago. Not a huge scale attack, but also just emphasising the human cost of ransomware. Sometimes that can feel very, very removed from human beings. But I think it's always good to remember and dwell on the massive stress that these cause. Also the threat to jobs. You know, Joe was just mentioning Jaguar Land Rover, production halted, and it was the supply chain that needed the bailout from government, because it's not just the single businesses, but their entire network of suppliers who rely on these huge businesses to stay functioning.
And Emily, you said the R word there, ransomware. How does a ransomware attack actually work in 2025?
In lots of different ways, but the key thing is that a bad actor somehow gets access to your systems and scrambles the data, locks you out of them. And so I think one of the major things that happens is no one knows how to contact each other or where anything is, including their contingency plan. And this is where the National Cybersecurity Centre today was advising people, well, do print out your plan. But the basic premise of ransomware is you can't get access to your stuff, so you can't run your business. And so that gives you a huge incentive to pay a ransom to get access back to your stuff. There's lots of different variations on a theme. So the bad actor might also leak that data. So having got access to your data, they might publish it to embarrass you or to put further pressure on you or your customers. And this was a twist that we saw with the kiddo nursery a few weeks ago, was that the bad actors also gained access to children's records, including their pictures and their safeguarding notes, and started to publish them on the dark web. So there's many layers of extortion going on here, but the principle is you get locked out and you pay to get back in.
Although, Joe, the extraordinary thing about the kiddo extortion was that the hackers seemed to have some sensitivity for how their actions were being perceived by everyone else, and they pulled back from the brink because they thought they were getting a bad reputation.
Yeah, the kiddo nursery hack, one of the strangest cyber attacks I've ever covered, because in terms of the number of people here, 8,000 children, pupils, plus their families as well, not a huge amount of people affected by this, but the nature of the attack and the nature of the extortion, posting pictures and profiles of children. I went on the darknet website and I showed a few people what I was seeing, and every time I showed them those profiles of kids, it was just, a sharp intake of air, because this felt like a line being crossed. And the hackers contacted me long before they started posting on the dark net, and we were sort of sitting on it, didn't want to cover it to kind of give them airtime. But once they started doing that, we obviously reported it as a story. The rest of the country did as well. And then this bizarre thing of them sort of thinking, oh, hang on a minute, we might have gone too far here. So they initially...
Hackers have hearts.
Yeah, well, they initially blurred the pictures. And then a few days later, I got a message saying, just to let you know, we have taken it all down. We're no longer extorting kiddo, and we are removing the data. And you might think, yes, maybe that's because they have morals and ethics and a heart. But actually, there's a really practical reason to that as well, which is that they have tarnished their own reputation in the cybercrime underworld, because they do have rules and they do have sort of very loose...
It's the community itself.
It is. And reputation does matter. And also they might be a bit scared of police activity because they've upset so many people. And then, of course, we saw 2 arrests of 17-year-olds.
So if we go back to what's been happening today, though, with this annual report from the National Cyber Security Centre, it's also been accompanied by a letter to lots of big businesses from a whole load of ministers, including the Chancellor. What's the government urging people to do? Because I would hope that if you're a big business in the FTSE 350, you've got quite good cyber protections already.
Yeah, and I think they probably have, in a sense. They've got the latest and greatest flashy box of tricks that cybersecurity companies are always selling them. But the letter, as Emily touched on, the letter talks about, it's not just about having those kind of things in place. It's about preparing for what happens when, as the CEO of the NCSC said today during his speech, what happens when the screens go blank? When the computer screens are offline, have you got a plan? And if you haven't got a plan, written down somewhere safe, preferably printed out and put somewhere safe, then you could be in the situation that we've seen so many times this year where companies have no idea how to function.
Although one wonders that if you're in a world where you're having to use pen and paper, how your business ever gets back to using computers again if the cyber attack's that bad. I mean, it just seems so far removed from normal everyday business.
Yeah, and
to go back to pen and paper.
Yeah, and there was some people in the business meeting this morning I was in, and they were saying, well, this is ridiculous. How can a multinational company be expected to go back to pen and paper? It's unrealistic. But that is the reality. I covered a major ransomware attack on a really big aluminium producer in Norway called Norsk Hydro a few years ago. They couldn't operate a single computer in their company. Production lines went still. They didn't know what to do. And there was an old man down in the bowels of the production line who liked paper. And he became the hero of the hour because he had reams of printouts of exactly what molds they should be making for what customers in what parts of the world. And thanks to his pen and paper, they were able to resume production. And then, of course, as you say, there is a long road between turning the machines back on and then fully operating.
But Emily, is the idea today from these ministers that you should be able to work your business on pen and paper rather than just pen and paper being the backup for who to call when there's a crisis?
I think it's the latter. Let's think about operating a business like Jaguar Land Rover and their production line.
Yeah, it doesn't run on Post-it notes, does it?
It doesn't run on Post-it notes, and you can stand in front of a robot as much as you like with your pen and paper. It's not going to build 1,000 Land Rovers a day. I think there's a really practical, very useful message here from the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is make sure you can get hold of a copy of your contingency plan, because the first thing that you can do when your screens go black and you realise you have lost access to email, you've lost access to your document system, as well as what you do for your business, you've got to be able to recover sufficiently to contact your staff and know what to do. So I think it's great to see that the emphasis is shifting away from what Joe calls, all of the gadgets and gadgetry around cybersecurity. That's important. It's important to monitor your systems, but it's ultimately about training your staff as well and managing the risk. Resilience is about recovery. So pen and paper, you're not going to be able to run Land Rover. You're maybe not going to even be able to fly your plane. But we saw in September there was a big cyber attack on Collins Aerospace, which provides support for multiple airlines, and there was huge disruption. The airlines that recovered most quickly had a few things in common. One, some did switch to manual check-in, so it has got its place. But ultimately, they had resilient systems. They had their own sources of backups and robust contingency planning. So they had anticipated, so what will we do if this happens? And I think that can be the difference between rapid recovery and a business disaster.
I'm just thinking about manual check-in at the airport, how that actually works. Is that just putting your name on you've got a printout of your ticket, like in the old days when you had a paper ticket, and then they just put your name on a clipboard and then you get on the plane? How did that work?
I think it worked back in the day, didn't it? And it's like, I thought there was an incredibly imaginative response in the midst of the horrible Marks and Spencer's attack. Was Marks and Spencer's went to its suppliers and said, look, just send us, we've got no idea what's going on. Send us what you normally send us and we'll sort it out later. And the supplier network, of course, it's a win-win for everybody because the supplier network are incredibly dependent on Marks and Spencer's remaining solvent and functioning. But they came to the aid of Marks and Spencer's, and that's also another key element in recovering from a cyber attack. Is it's a team sport. The National Cybersecurity Centre offer that sort of support for major businesses, but also if you have insurance, call to the insurer can prevent your costs and losses ramping up really quickly, and also bring people in to help you.
And Joe, I'm lucky I work for a big organisation where there's lots of people working on our cybersecurity. I just have to make sure my software is up to date on my laptop, do my training courses every couple of months, and that's basically, and then do the sensible things like not giving away my password and updating my password.
Gold star.
Thank you very
marks.
much. Not looking for a pat on the back, but I'll take it. I bet I'll now get hacked in the next 10 days. Hostage to fortune. But the reason I was saying that was that once you dig into what the government's doing here, you realise the vast amount of effort that is being put in for people who don't have that luxury of a big IT department or a big information security department. So, for example, if you're a sole trader, like a plumber or a painter and decorator, what you can do to get trained up to protect your business, or you're a small business with like 10 employees and you're your own IT department. There's a lot of effort going in here.
There is, and there's loads of really good free services that the National Cybersecurity Centre is offering, those types of businesses, the small businesses. I found out yesterday they're offering free cyber insurance for if you complete this kind of like audit system they do called Cyber Essentials, then you can get free cyber insurance, which is quite a costly thing to do if you haven't got a lot of money.
And it's interesting because Cyber Essentials sounds like, no offence to the people who designed it, a slightly lame name. It sounds like a worksheet you get from the library and you think, right, how's that going to protect me?
Yeah.
But actually, it is a set of tools tools and checklists, and it comes with this insurance policy.
I wouldn't. I think it's closer to the library checklist, to be honest. It's an audit. Do you do this? Do you do that? Have you got? Is your software up to date? Blah blah blah. That kind of thing. But if you do that, then that gives you the basic, kite mark that says, right, we are doing the basics right. And then after that, you can do Cyber Essentials Plus and things. And the National Cybersecurity Centre, it is doing a great job in this area. But I think, in truth, if you are a sole trader or a small business owner, you are less at risk. And I'm not saying that you're not going to get hacked, but I'm saying that if I'm a cyber criminal, I will go for the medium or large.
You're
businesses.
a needle in a haystack as opposed to a big bale of hay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Emily, what is the next frontier for cyber attacks? Because we've kind of got used to the attacks that sort of flood networks with requests and so bring down the websites. We're all getting used to this idea of ransomware, so being locked out and then there being extortion to get access back into it, which you were talking about a minute ago. What are some things that are just appearing now that might become big in the next few years?
Well, there's a lot of interest in the use of AI to fool people into clicking on links they shouldn't or giving away credentials. But I'm going to turn your question around the other way, Adam. The responses to cybercrime, and particularly scams and fraud, the cost of cybercrime globally is estimated to be $11 trillion a year. That's the size of a very major economy. So we are globally losing a massive amount of money to cybercrime. And I think that what we're seeing is societies have had enough. And there have been really huge attacks this year, like on Marks and Spencer's. There's also been a spate of arrests, and that's very unusual. I mean, Joe will tell you it's very, very unusual to see any cyber criminals arrested. And I think that is not easy to do because cyber criminality is inherently cross-border in nature, spans many countries, policing set up very locally. So sharing information across borders, across sectors, will lead to cyber criminals being brought to justice.
And actually, Joe, I just had a press release from the Foreign Office. And okay, it's not like directly cybercrime, it's online fraud. And they're talking about working with the US to arrest a network of people all across Southeast Asia with and hit them with sanctions. It includes, freezing 19 London properties, including a £12 million mansion and a £100 million office building. And there's people in like fake casinos in Myanmar, which is actually just a giant scam factory.
Yeah,
there's an example of that sort of thing happening right now.
Yeah, and like Emily said, it is an international cybercrime ecosystem. What you're describing there, I imagine, is something like, for example, pig butchering or sextortion attacks. That they're kind of
What's pig butchering?
Pig butchering is when someone strikes up a romantic relationship with you online, and then over the course of a long, protracted period of flirting, introduces you to get-rich-quick schemes, which you then invest in, and then the kind of controversial term pig butchering refers
it's a horrible phrase.
It refers to sort of fattening up the pig, getting more and more out of the victim before you flee.
Right. Emily, also, right at the beginning of this report from the National Cyber Security Centre is a list of the countries that are involved in lots of these operations.
Yes, Joe, as Joe's saying, this is an international business, and business is good. There are particular countries that have these scam centres. Myanmar comes up a lot, and Southeast Asia does too. And often the people in those centres are held, that they're working as slaves and that they are held against their will. So there are many victims in this cycle. But there are, in some phrases, there are scam exporting countries, and those it's not particularly state-led, but there are major criminal organisations based in countries and victimising people across the globe, including the UK.
But Joe, some of it does seem to be state-led.
Some of it is. So if I'm looking now at this, as you mentioned earlier, this booklet that the NCSC has given us all, and They wouldn't be drawn on whether or not the order that they've written, the threats in terms of the countries.
Well, I would say, I said it's right at the start.
It is.
You don't have to read many pages to get to this bit.
Exactly. When you look at
prominent.
it, says the cyber threat to the UK, and it's got China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. But the thing to bear in mind is that, yes, in terms of the state level activity coming from those countries, it's extremely serious and extremely sophisticated. But still, the NCSC argues that most organisations and companies in this country, they're more likely to be hit by criminal cybercrime gangs, ransomware, extortion, data breach, that kind of thing. So, yes, we need to be aware of the threats from nation states, but actually, run-of-the-mill everyday stuff that will bring your company to its knees is criminal, and that's not really anything to do with the nation states. The only slight caveat to that is that there is little bits of evidence we have here and there that says that some of the ransomware gangs based in Russia, most of them are in Russian-speaking countries and some former Soviet countries, they have a kind of slight link sometimes to the Russian security services, but it's certainly not a formal relationship if it is one.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Emily, thanks to you too.
Thanks, Adam.
Now, we received an email into the Newscast inbox saying, just bumped into Chris Mason at the SNP party conference and told him I'm a big Newscast fan. And that is from newscaster Janet. And it made me realise Janet has seen Chris more recently than I have. So let's rectify that now. Hello.
Hello, and hello to Janet and indeed all newscasters who I met in Aberdeen at the SNP and indeed in Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Bournemouth. I think I've missed one out. Brighton.
Yes.
On the party conference and indeed trades union conference circuit. And no doubt newscasters in Swansea, at Plaid Cymru and at the Northern Ireland parties as well, and at the Greens in Bournemouth.
A very comprehensive atlas of party conferences as party conference season draws to a close. What was your take on the SNP conference, by the way? We had quite a long chat with Kate Forbes, the Deputy First Minister, on yesterday's episode, but I'll be intrigued to hear what... She was obviously very upbeat.
Yeah, so I thought it was upbeat. The mood was upbeat. And I think part of that's a sort of psychological human contrast with just a year or so ago where they were on their knees, they'd been absolutely whacked in the general election, and plenty thought, crikey, that doesn't bode well for the... devolved Scottish Parliament elections coming up in May of next year. And then since then, with all the stuff we talk about on Newscast all the time around fragmentation of politics and the rise of reform and Labour being seen to perform not particularly well and being unpopular, kind of means that even though they haven't necessarily leapt forward the SNP in their own popularity, others have sort of colonised each other's votes, if you like. And so... They're in a pretty decent position, particularly for a party that's been in government for 18 years in Scotland. At the moment, they look like they're going to be the biggest party in the next Scottish Parliament. And then they're making this argument about trying to get a majority, which is hard under the electoral system for the Scottish Parliament, and saying, look, that was enough to persuade the government in London to give the party a referendum last time when they managed it in 2011 and they got the referendum in 2014. So they are trying to do that again. As I say, it's a very high bar, but they were chipper because a year ago things looked bleak for them, and now they look considerably more positive.
And then at Westminster today, the Prime Minister was giving an update on the situation in Gaza after his very whistle-stop tour. It wasn't even a tour, it was there and back. Visit to the big Donald Trump sponsored peace summit in Egypt.
Yeah, so we had yesterday was the first day back for Westminster and for the House of Commons in ages because of the conference recess, as it's known. So it was always expected to be quite a big day because all sorts of stuff that's happened in the meantime tends to get addressed in Parliament and often by the Prime Minister. And of course, the Prime Minister wasn't there. He was doing this dash to Sharm el-Sheikh and back. So he did that statement at lunchtime today, saying he was able to use words in the House that he had longed to use for a long time, talking about the release of the hostages, talking about the ceasefire in Gaza. Intriguingly, he then made an argument, because he's faced some criticism for this, to say that the UK recognising a Palestinian state actually helped bring about peace to Gaza. Some critics have said, did that not sort of get in the way because it was something America disagreed with? His argument was that the UK, alongside others like France and Canada and Australia, doing it at the same time, led to that declaration that happened in New York a few weeks ago, where the entire group of what's known as Arab League countries condemned what happened on October the 7th, urged Hamas to disarm, and demanded that they ended their rule in Gaza. So the government's position is that was a useful stepping stone along the way to where we got to yesterday. The Conservatives were making an argument that suggested, firstly, the UK's involvement had been wildly overstated, and teased away a little bit about that. We've seen the rows, haven't we, in the last couple of days about the US ambassador to Israel saying that the UK was delusional to say that it had a significant role. But then we did hear from Steve Witkoff, who's the US Special Envoy to the Middle East, praising Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, in particular, for the work that he had done. And we know that he'd been out in Egypt in the days prior to the ceasefire. And
speaking of whom, Jonathan Powell being the National Security Advisor, what more have we learned about this whole trial that collapsed against the two men who were charged with spying for China, which they always denied, and actually it never even went to trial because the Crown Prosecution Service dropped the charges? Yeah, so this is like thicket follows thicket in all of this. A lot of this has happened during this conference recess, which means that, firstly, a lot of us who would otherwise perhaps have been scraping over every particular detail have instead been in various conference halls, and crucially, more to the point, Parliament has not been sitting until yesterday, which I think has probably slowed down the kind of public examination of this case up to a point. So what we've learned today, so quick recap, these two 30-something men, Christopher Cash, former parliamentary researcher, Christopher Berry, former teacher, both deny any wrongdoing. They were charged over alleged spying. It was going to come to court until it didn't, because the conclusion was taken by the Crown Prosecution Service, that there wasn't enough evidence to secure a conviction. And they argued this all boiled down to the fact that the government didn't brand China as a threat to national security. The language was more ambiguous than that, particularly a couple of years back under the previous government, when these charges and allegations date from. But there's been a lot of who knew what and when, and was there any political interference, because the government has clearly been warming up its relationship with Beijing compared with the previous government. Where we are today is we learn that the Prime Minister didn't see the evidence submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service by the government. It was submitted by the Deputy National Security Advisor, a guy called Matthew Collins, who was a civil servant. Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, is a political appointee. He is a special advisor, so the politics around him is, if you like, is a little sharper. Downing Street saying that these witness statements are an independent record drawing on the full range of evidence at the time, but they haven't seen it. Some had suggested, in fact, Tom Tugendhat, the former security minister, Conservative, had suggested that Matthew Collins had sort of been thrown under the bus by the government. A bit of pushback from that today. So in the readout that we get every week from the cabinet meeting, which is where they decide what to tell us what was talked about, rather than necessarily a full chapter and verse, it was striking that it said that the Prime Minister had told ministers Matthew Collins faithfully carries out his job, and talked about how every effort had been made in his submission to provide evidence to support the case within the constraints. These are the constraints of how China was formally seen at the time. So that's kind of where we are. The questions are carrying on. The Conservatives have tried to see and ask the question whether the whole trial could be resumed if the government was to declare that Beijing is a threat to national security. So the various lines of inquiry being pursued by us lot journalistically. It's quite tricky because you run into national security stuff, you run into sort of timelines for meetings that are happening a long time ago and trying to bottom out when they might have happened and what that might mean. The point in my diary I have circled right now, Adam, is Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday lunchtime, because we've seen recently Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, develop something of a taste for, pardon the phraseology in this context, but sort of prosecuting an argument across all of her questions in the hope of either getting answers or highlighting the Prime Minister's potential ducking and diving and evading. Does she decide to go for that strategy on this topic tomorrow, and where does that lead us? I just wonder, because it seems to me, I don't know this, but it seems to me it wouldn't surprise me if that's what she were to do, and who knows where it runs from then. Well, yeah, because the Tories have definitely got the bit between their teeth on this, whether there's a bit there or not.
Yeah, completely. Now, how much the Prime Minister is then willing to say politically, willing to say on national security grounds, etc., etc. There's already talk about how some people might end up giving evidence to various parliamentary committees, but would it happen in private rather than in public because of the nature and sensitivities around all this stuff? As I think we may have mentioned on Newscast the other day, but I've lost track. There has been a warming up of the relationship between the UK and China since the change in government. Pretty much every senior figure in government who might have a good political reason to go to Beijing, other than the Prime Minister, has been. So the Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, he went as Foreign Secretary. The Chancellor's been. The Business Secretary's been. Jonathan Powell has been. And there's been talk for a while about whether the Prime Minister might go. It's not happened since Theresa May was Prime Minister. And so that's the big picture thing. How do we manage our relationship, our kind of geopolitical relationship with this coming superpower, but which has a wildly different worldview from our own? That's the crux of all of this. And this gets quite knotty in the particulars, but the big picture argument is going to return again and again and again in the coming decades.
Although I thought it was interesting that Dan Jarvis, the security minister, who did a statement about this in Parliament yesterday, and that was the first, as you said, moment where Parliament really got its teeth into it. He did say the word threat or threats or threatening quite a lot of times, even though he didn't say China was a national security threat. And so that's the behaviour of a minister who doesn't want to look like he's being soft on the more threatening aspects of China, even while all his colleagues are flying out to do deals.
Completely that. And then you get into the weeds of in quite what format would a prosecution service, i.e. the CPS, need words from government ministers privately or publicly expressed that say threat or words to the effect of threat, even if the official designation is slightly softer language like that, epoch-defining challenge, etc., etc. That's where you get into questions that swirl around the Crown Prosecution Service. Now, in their judgment, they didn't think they had enough to bring a case, and that is that. But there's all of that swirling into the mix as well.
And also, just going back to some of the documents, you realise actually there was this High Court case after the election, which basically raised the bar for the evidence you need to prosecute these kinds of cases. Yeah, so that's another thing that changed between the Conservative government and the Labour government, just like actually the legal landscape that the Crown Prosecution Service was operating in.
And that's exactly the argument that is made, that yes, this is talking about the Official Secrets Act from 1911, which goes back a rather long way, but that crucially this precedent that was created effectively changed the legal terms of trade. So even though they are reliant on what was going on before, they are looking at the law as it is now, because that would be the basis upon which a trial that is now not happening would have happened. So yeah, another layer of complexity.
Chris, I've taken up enough of your time today. Thank you very much.
Ta-ra.